Good morning and welcome to Morning Coffee with Brigid. I'm Brigid Burke and I'm back after a day off, basically. I needed Monday to be off and, I had to bring my car back. Good morning, Alex. I had to be, and good morning, Joanne. I had to, excuse me. I should probably start taking allergy medicine at night because it's just, I wake up with this and it's really kind of annoying. I did my Virgo reading yesterday morning instead of this live stream, because before I went to the thing. Good morning, Pat. And my voice was really, really husky on that one, so I can only imagine. Interesting thing about the Virgo reading that I did on, that I posted them yesterday afternoon, I think. Or either late morning or afternoon. I also have now I'm going to have like 10 of these morning coffees that I have not posted yet. So the people who catch up with them on YouTube are going to get barraged all at once. But I didn't want to post them yesterday after posting 5 tarot videos. So, because people are going to be like one notification after another, and they're going to be like, what is it with this channel, you know? So, yeah, so it's been but it was interesting because in the Virgo reading, I had, with Cartouche, I had the Seth card with fire, okay? Because when you draw Seth with Cartouche, you always draw a second card to find out how, because Seth always indicates a block or an obstacle or an anxiety. Good morning, Sam. Or good afternoon, Sam. And an anxiety or something like that has to be resolved. And so normally you draw a second card to see how it will resolve itself. So you always draw them in pairs. So I draw Seth with fire, and then I drew the Chariot. And it was in the 4th house of Virgo's reading. So I was just like, that's really strange because, good morning, Suda. I was thinking of my mom, my sister's a Virgo, okay? And I was thinking, oh God, that's the house of mom. And we've got we've got Seth there. I said, this is not good. We don't need this. And then with the fire card, I figured either there's going to be a lost temper or there's going to be something where somebody's going to be, what's the word? Like there's going to be some kind of like an altercation that could be a little bit heated. But the Chariot I thought was odd because often the Chariot has to do with movement, it can have to do literally with transportation, and it can have to do with moving house. And I thought, well, she's not moving house, so that's really odd. Well, I got a WhatsApp message from my sister yesterday that apparently she had a little bit of a go-round with my mom and she was getting very worried about her. Sorry, my fringe is not behaving this morning. A little bit of a go-round because my mom was insisting on going to the cemetery to put flowers on my uncle's grave. My uncle died in 1977. And my sister's like, I don't know why that's important because his grave is literally piled with like all kinds of stuff from the family, but just like whatever. So she drove my mother over to do that. And then my mother got it into her head. She got an obsession, which is another thing that fire can be. She got this obsession in her head that she had to find the street that she lived on when she lived in Chatham. And so my sister popped it into the GPS. She's like, okay, well, let's go look for it. She said this road was crazy. She goes, it turned into like this one-lane dirt road because it was all these villas and big houses because that's what it all is now. It wasn't that way when my mother was young, but it was that way now. And my mother was upset because she was insisting, you have to keep going, you have to keep going. My sister's like, there's nowhere else to go. We're literally at the end of this road. And she says it was even kind of sketchy turning around and everything in that area. It's just like there's forested. She said she was actually worried about getting out of there, just because of the conditions of the road. My sister has an SUV, right? And then my mother's still insisting that, well, I got to find out what the right address is because I have to go back and find it. So it's really funny. It literally came up. It was it was an obstacle. It was somebody. There was a problem with somebody's kind of burning inspiration that had to do with driving somewhere. So that was really weird that came up quite literally for my sister. So anyway, just thought I would share that for people who watch my readings. I do get a lot of feedback from people that tell me that they're at least the people for watching them, it seems like they're spot on. So so they're speaking to somebody out there. My sister, I don't think my sister's ever watched them, but I don't know. Maybe when I think Virgo, she's partially on my mind when I do it, so who knows. So anyway, yeah, my day off, got my car back. I think it ended up costing more than what the estimate was, a little bit more. But the insurance company took care of it, and I had to pay the deductible, which was painful. But But I did go out to breakfast. To those of you who were on my intuitive development, I said I was going to go to breakfast afterwards. And I did. Speak to me for certain. Oh, okay. Oh, good. I'm glad that the readings do speak to you. Yeah, say, sure. My boyfriend watched Aries and was like, yep, she's talking to me. Well, that's that's good to know. Yeah, because it's, because I'm doing them and I'm kind of like, I don't know. Like I said, I don't know who they're for. And when you're doing a general reading like that, like an all sign reading, because you're not just talking about people who have the sun sign. It could be people, like sometimes I've done them and I find my husband had change in travel plans and he's a Virgo. Oh, interesting. Yeah, there was something about travel with that and I can't quite remember that. Yeah, so yeah, there's a Virgo's reading was a little bit intense. It was a little bit stressful. It was a little bit more like, take a step back, focus on yourself and what you need to get done for you. Jeremy likes listening to me. Oh, does he? Okay, that's cool. No, I'm glad there's a lot of people watching these, because like I said, I don't know. When I look at the number of views, I look at these other readers and they've got 2,000 views, and then you look at mine and it's like, you've had 10. It's like, okay. Good morning, Jenny. So I am glad that there are people watching these and that they actually are helpful to people. But in any case, yeah, so what I wanted to talk about today was I just wanted to mention that about the reading, because I thought it was kind of interesting. But I was okay. We usually do our ghost story per day, so we're gonna do that. And I was also gonna do. Also, we have a topic for today. I have some really interesting topics lately. Oh, I was talking about how I was going out to breakfast yesterday, and I got my copy in the mail of or from Amazon of The King in Yellow. And that is a fascinating book. I may talk about that on the Katonia live stream. Part of the reason I didn't live stream yesterday is because the moon was opposed to Saturn, and basically it said this is not a day that you're going to get anything useful done, and this is not a day that you are, and where you might just be misunderstood in anything that you say. So I was like, you know what? I'll live stream for that one on Wednesday instead. So I kind of put that off, and but The King in Yellow is fascinating. I had a friend years ago who had told me I should read it, and I don't even remember if they'd given me a copy of it or not. But I was going through my books, and I'm like, I thought I had a copy of The King in Yellow, but I didn't. So I just ordered it. It wasn't expensive. It was like $7 or something. Oh, by the way, this morning was 45 degrees when we woke up. And I decided, just for the heck of it, I was thinking about what that was in Celsius or centigrade, so I popped it into the Fahrenheit to Celsius converter, and it's 7.77, which, for you Babylon fans out there, you'll get the reference. So I woke up to 777 this morning. But the book is fascinating with The King in Yellow, because it's just really weird, because the first story in it, it's a group of short stories that are centered around a play called The King in Yellow. And I don't know, I haven't gotten far enough in the book to see if they put the actual play in the book. Supposedly it's supposedly a lot of Lovecraftian stuff jumped off of this one. 38 and rain here. Oh wow, that's chilly. It was jumping off the a lot of it is supposed to be jumping off of this play. But Lovecraftian stuff jumps off this whole book, the whole idea of the yellow sign and all of this kind of stuff. But the first story is about a guy who believes, they talk about in America in the 1920s, of course this was all fictional, it's supposed to be like a utopia, but it's a real, it's really a very questionable idea of a utopia, because supposedly everything's good economically and everything's wonderful and this and that. But then they start talking about certain groups of immigrants and black people and stuff. Oh, they moved them to this island and they moved them here. I'm like, okay, this is sounding like ridiculously racist, and I don't think that's really part of a utopia. But then it's like the United States changes, because in this perfect union that they live in, all of a sudden everybody wants to kill themselves. Everybody is in despair and wants the right to end their life. So this story is about the installation of a chamber in which one could do that painlessly. And it's put there by the government. They said they pushed down all the houses where the quote unquote foreign coffee shops used to be, and they put this chamber there, which is the symbolism of that's fascinating. But it centers around this guy they call him Mr. Wilde, and probably this is a reference to Oscar Wilde. Wow, sounds interesting. But it gets even better, because this guy, I forget what his name is, but he has a cousin named Lewis, and he's the narrator. This guy who's the narrator is he goes to this one heraldry shop, or they somebody who makes an armor or something. Somebody who makes armor, and there's the girl there, and whenever she hears the name, she goes to the door, but she's disappointed to see it's him, because she's actually in love with his cousin. So there becomes this whole thing about him, the cousin who's in some kind of military regiment, who comes to New York City and then goes and meets with the girl, and then they get engaged and all this stuff, and how he wants to stop it because he has this crazy idea that he is going to be the king of America, and that he is going to be the rightful king and the heir of this, and because this guy called Mr. Wilde has told him so. And Mr. Wilde is a really grotesque figure, but probably it's a reference to the decadence, because it was written in the late Victorian era. There was a lot of criticism of the decadents who wrote around that time. The Rossettis, Swinburne, Wilde, all of those were all considered to be these kind of decadent authors. And the books were often packaged in yellow, so this is why some people say, okay, The King in Yellow is probably a critique of these decadent people who are, because The King in Yellow wears this mask that, but there's nothing behind it, So the idea is that it creates this golden image, but there's nothing behind it. And there's just some other weird things in this story. The repairer of reputations is somebody who gets people. People who are the heads of big media companies and newspapers and stuff to do his bidding, to either repair people's reputations or to tear them down. Like, he controls what's a lie and what's the truth. And of course, the people who know him think he's crazy and they hate him. But this guy's like really fixated because he's told this guy that he's going to be the king of America. And what's weird is they send somebody out to kind of dispatch his cousin, which doesn't actually work out, by the way. But the guy's name is Vance, which I think is really weird. I don't know. It's just a weird story. I was reading it and I was like, that's just really, really odd. Anyway, it's probably, it's definitely an interesting read. I'm going to probably talk more about it over on Catonia podcast. What I was going to talk about today in terms of a story, I was like, okay, what's our ghost story for today? And it was called, and I decided to go with an M.R. James story that most people have heard of, because I don't want to do spoilers for people. Although even the way I'm going to tell it to you, it's still worth reading the story itself, because in a 5-minute version of it, you're going to lose a lot in translation. You're also not going to see the way he develops the characters and everything in the story as well. So this story is fascinating for a couple of reasons. It's not. I'm not going to say it's my favorite M.R. James story, but it's very much about. It is an extremely famous ghost story that I've heard referenced in a lot of different places, and I think there's even been artwork that's been done to go along with this. That people have made paintings that are represented by what was in this story. So, in this particular story, it's about university professors that are going on break after full term, and there's a guy. The main character is named Parkins, and Parkins decides he's going to go to Burnstow, which is in east of England, probably the East Anglia area, which is where a lot of these stories are set. They're usually set somewhere between Cambridge and in East Anglia, kind of there on the eastern coast of England. And he's going there. He's going in the wintertime, and the only hotel that's open is a place called the Globe Inn. Like, all the lodging houses are shut up for the winter and so forth. But going to improve his game of golf. That's why he's going. So he goes to Burnstow, and as he goes, one of his colleagues, who they refer to as Disney, okay, now this is long before Walt Disney World or even Mickey Mouse existed, so no connection there. But Disney asks if he can, he says, if you're going to be in the area, he said, there's like the remains of an old Knights Templar church. Okay. Now, the Knights Templar, anybody familiar with modern occultism knows a bit about the Knights Templar, and what their connection's supposed to be. But supposedly they were a group that worshipped Baphomet, which has often been interpreted as Satan, which Baphomet is not Satan. But in any case, there was a whole thing about the rituals of the Knights Templar in the Middle Ages. They were connected with the Crusades. Eventually, they were all kind of burned at the stake as heretics. So anyway, there's this old Templar church there that's supposed to be there on the shore near the Globe Inn. So he goes out, and the other big character, there's a major. There's a general, like a retired major, who... very, very stiff man, very, very gruff. Somehow him and Parkins managed to become friends, even though Parkins is a little bit kind of, I don't know, I think James describes her as being like old womanish, like the way he behaves. He's just got this kind of very fussy kind of manner about him. And he gets this room in the Globe, and there are 2 beds in this room, and he's annoyed that there's 2 beds. And of course, one of his colleagues says, "Look here, I'll come and I'll occupy it for you." Of course, just trampling on his boundaries, and he's just like, well, I don't know. So he tries to find a nice way to say he'll be a hindrance, but he says, "Oh well," he says, I'll come, but he says he's going to come later in the week. And so he has this room with 2 beds, and so he puts all his books and everything down. He gets set up because he's going to do some work while he's there, and he gets up in the morning, and the maid says to him, asks him, which... Oh, sorry, just dropped this. The maid asks him, like, which bed he wanted made up, because she says, "Well, it looks like you've slept in both of them." And he's like, "Well, that's odd. I only slept in the one bed, I didn't." He says, he says, "Oh, I'm sorry. I must have disordered it more than I thought." And of course, she just says, "Oh, no trouble, sir," and she fixes it up, whatever. So anyway, he meets this gruff old major, and the major is extremely Protestant, okay? So he thinks anything that smacks of popishness, anything that smacks of ritual, like mystery or ritual, he suspects them of being, part of a popist plot. Like, he's got this kind of his thing in his mind. So it's important to remember about him. So, in any case, they go out on the links the first day and they play, and apparently Parkins' performance is so appalling, and this major is his golf partner, that he literally thinks it's better to let the major cool off and not walk home with him. So he walks along, he says, "Oh, I said I was going to go look for that, preceptory or whatever that his colleague was looking for." So he goes along the beach, and he quite literally trips over the space. So he kind of starts digging around. As they were saying, people always sometimes like to prove that if they had actually, he was not an archaeologist, but if he had learned archaeology, he probably would have been good at it. It's that kind of a thing. So he's looking around, and he finds this hollow tube, and there's something in it that's rattling, and he, pops it out. And he can't quite see what it is, but it's like this metal tube, like this metal object. And so he takes it back to his room with him. And, cleans the dust and the sand out of it and everything, and, cleans it up nicely on a little piece of paper, because he's very neat. And it looks like a whistle. And it says, the whistle has the words carved on it in Latin. It has symbols carved on it as well, but it says, "Quis es este que venit," which means in Latin, "Who is this who is coming?" And that is a phrase that has been used in, that's definitely been a phrase that's been used in other milieu. Who is this who is coming? So he's not really sure what it is, but he decides he's going to blow into this whistle. Okay, and he does this. First time he does, nothing really happens. But then, this huge gust comes in and kind of, opens, pushes the windows open. And now, mind you, on the coast there, it is very, very windy, so that's not necessarily that weird or unusual. But he's just, he has to keep fastening the window and pushing it shut, and, because it's almost like the wind is trying to, push its way into his room. So he keeps doing this. And so he blows it a couple of times. And then, he kind of puts it down and... leaves on his dresser, and he's getting ready to go to bed, and he looks out the window, and he sees a man running down the beach. But he just seems, and he wonders, this person's out really, really late. And the person just keeps running and running, but it's almost like they're and he thought, well, is this person, I think actually, no, sorry, I've got this out of order. This actually happened as soon as he picked up the whistle. He sees this person running, and he thinks, well, this person's going to be late for dinner at the rate that they're going, and he's like, oh, and so am I. So he manages to go in. Like I said, he's tried the whistle and all this stuff. He goes to bed, he has this happen, okay? And then he wakes up with the bed kind of disordered. Okay, that's the kind of thing. There's this wind that's coming in and disordering the bed. So he goes out the next day to go golfing, and he tells the major about this whistle that he found, because he's talking about how he doesn't believe in ghosts and spirits, and he kind of, very, what's the word that I'm looking for? Very pompous kind of way he's going to be lecturing, which the major listens to. But then when the major finds out that he's found a whistle, he says, "Oh, you found something over there." He's like, I would be careful about using such a thing of people with such popish connections as the Templars, right? And but he talks about how, he says, now, the wind came up, and he says, I could have said that I whistled and that somehow I called for it. He's like, but that would be absolutely ridiculous, right? So, and of course, the major is not quite so sure. So in any case, when they go into dinner, the major's a little bit more, they play cards together and stuff. He's a little more somber, and he says, you know where I am if you need me. Basically, that he's upstairs. So, Parkins is like, well, I'm sure I won't, but, So he sits up in bed, and he's reading. And then finally he blows out his candle and he goes to sleep. And then he notices that somebody in the bed next to him sits straight up. And it's like this, he can't describe it. He calls it like a face of crumpled linen. It's like made like a body out of the bed sheets. And it's kind of feeling its way around the room. He's realizing it's blind. And it's groping around trying to find where he is in the room. And he is in absolute, abject terror. And, but the thing is standing between him and the door, so he can't run out the door. He makes a little bit of a sound, and it gets a clue, and then it tries to block him. So now it's like he's out of bed now. He's, by the window, and this thing is by the door. And, he's, and the thing is, it's little, part of the sheet, kind of brushes against him, and he can't resist a cry of disgust. So the thing goes to lunge at him. Fortunately, at this moment, he screams, and the major comes and breaks into the room and saves him basically from falling out the window. But the only thing in the room is the bedsheet, which is now messed up and disordered on the floor. And so the major, so they say nothing. The major, somehow they manage to. He just tells the hotel staff, keeps everybody out, says everything's fine. Somehow they manage to convince people that Parkins is not crazy. He's just that. There was just something that happened, like in a bad dream or something. And then the major went and investigated, and he had said that this whistle, from what he could tell, seemed to conjure up. He had said that he had read a story about something like that happening in India, where you could make a figure that really had kind of nothing. It was nothing really substantial to it, but it could take the form of things that were around it, and really the only thing that it could do was produce terror. It couldn't actually, if he had actually closed with it, it couldn't have actually hurt him. But they said after that, Parkins never complained again about ghosts, and actually they took the whistle, and the major went and took it and chucked it way out into the sea, because he was convinced of all of this. But in any case, afterwards, Parkins was certainly a believer in ghosts, and actually they said a night when the curtains are flapping and the moon is full, he has had many a sleepless night, because he's so traumatized by this event. So anyway, that was the story, and and part of it, because I told certain parts of it out of order, it probably was not as good, because I like I said, it's a pretty long short story, but it is a favorite. And I remember being in England, and there was a band called Space Dog. Okay, I think they were, that's what they were called. And they were actually quite interesting, because they were more of a synth band. They were more connected with John Fox when I used to go see him. His manager was going to see them, and he's like, "Oh, you should really go see them. They're really good." And I think they were actually doing playing in the Apple Store in London, because a lot of times they would have these little events there. And they were good. They used the theremin, the thing we always think of Jimmy Page using the theremin on Whole Lotta Love and stuff like that. But they actually know, this woman actually knows how to, Sarah Anglis, I think her name was, she actually knows how to play the theremin, and she knows how to do it right. But they had some weird contraptions and stuff, but they were actually really quite good. But they have a song that incorporates that line, and they incorporate this very creepy voice. Who is this? Who is coming? And every time I think of that, I'm like, oh, these guys are M.R. James fans, But it's a really, and like I said, the actual reading of it goes a lot better than my telling of it. But anyway, that's our ghost story for today. I'm not, as you can tell, I'm not a Sheneki, so I don't have the storytelling gift. But anyway, it's an interesting one. I have other ones that I like. I might share some other ones as well from that. So, okay, so moving on. I did want to talk about, okay, there was another thing that I saw the other day. I've been watching a little bit of this channel called Tale Foundry. And as I said, I like them because they're video essays. And they're video essays on literature and on fiction in particular, and on the psychological impacts of fiction and things like that, or what the stories are trying to tell us about culture, about the human condition. So I'm quite fond of this channel, even though there are some things about it that I feel like there's some conclusions they come to that I don't agree with. But nonetheless, it's still an interesting channel to watch. And this was talking about one of the darkest fairy tales. He had done it, I guess whoever owns this channel did it for Halloween one year, and said one of the darkest fairy tales. It was a Hans Christian Andersen fairy tale. Didn't give the title of it. But it's about a man who goes on vacation to a place. It's about a man and his shadow. And he goes on vacation someplace that's really, really hot. And it's so hot that you can't even see the shadow. So basically he has to stay inside, and it's still hot inside. But the town comes to life at night because, that's when that's when it's coolest and when people can actually go out and do things. And then it's kind of like that's when his shadow, he's able to actually see more of his shadow, and it's almost like he's interacting with it, like it's like they're almost like they're talking, or they have a relationship, or they're friends. And then he sees a house across the street with a door that's slightly ajar, and the house looks very interesting. There's always music coming from it, but nobody seems to know who lives there. So he looks at the house and he kind of half-jokingly says to his shadow, "Oh, if only you could go and investigate the place for me." But the shadow takes him at his word and goes across the street because he thinks he sees the form of a woman in there. And, so he's like, "Oh, I wonder what's over there." But he doesn't want to leave the house. The shadow goes and does it for him. And after that, he loses his shadow. His shadow disappears on him, and he has to go back home, and he tries to grow like another shadow. But then a couple of years go by, and then his actual shadow comes back, and he's like, dressed to the nines, and he's like, he says, "Oh, I went in the house and I learned all this really cool stuff, and there's all of the secrets of things, and all the secrets of poetry and everything, and So anyway, his shadow ends up like becoming this larger than life kind of thing, and what ends up happening is this guy ends up almost becoming the shadow of his shadow. The shadow is the one that now serves the shadow and not the other way around. And eventually there's like a beautiful princess or something, and the shadow is trying to court her, but she can see that something's not quite right there. And so she asks about this man with him, and he says, because the shadow himself knows nothing about philosophy, and the man has been trying to write about the true, the beautiful, the good, but he can't do it. Everything he does falls flat, and nobody's interested in his work. And so, but when he's sitting with the shadow says, "Oh, well, this is my, I'm so wealthy that I can afford to have a man act as my own shadow, and he can tell you everything." So of course this man starts talking about philosophy, and she's like, "Wow," but she's not in love with him; she's in love with the shadow. And eventually the shadow says to him, "Look, you just can stay with me, but you just have to like lay down at my feet and stuff when I want you to." And of course this is too much for the man; he can't take it. And so he rebels against the shadow, but then the shadow has him thrown in jail and then executed because now he's married to the princess. So it's a very dark fairy tale. It has a very dark ending. But as he points out, he says the whole point of this, I thought it was a really good exposition on the shadow. We hear a lot of people talk about doing shadow work. Okay, I hear this phrase a lot. I hear it a lot in the witchcraft community especially, but I've also hear it in other places, the idea that, I'm working on my shadow. And I think all of us have probably said that to some degree. Anyone who's doing any kind of spiritual work, anyone who's doing any kind of psychotherapeutic work, we always talk about the Jungian idea of the shadow. And Jung has pointed out that a shadow is really an integral part of who we are, and it's something that we need to explore and get to come to know. Now, the shadow is going to have all the things not only that we've been told to be ashamed of, but the shadow can also be all of those things that, the shadow does also contain things that maybe we don't want to express to the wide world, that would not be, that do not fit in with society in a certain way. And really what this tale kind of illustrates is the way in which when we confront the shadow, you can confront the shadow and you want to get to know the shadow, but you don't want the shadow to take over. Because when they take over, then that's also not good. It's not about the idea that you, you know, that in order to know in order to embrace your demons, you've got to become one of them, right? I mean, it's not really about that. It's about the way in which you understand what's there, who they are, and understand the place of whatever is contained in shadow. Now, the problem with this, and the problem that a lot of people have when I hear about people doing shadow work, is that a lot like the archetypes, you don't actually know what's there. You don't know what's in shadow. That's kind of the point. You don't really know. It's hidden. It's in shadow. It's in the darkness. And what we discover there is often shocking things that we learn about ourselves, or at least just about the human condition. Because, as I've often said, just as we have the potential to be the best people that we can be, when something is in shadow, we are also, we can, we also have the potential to be like the worst human beings. I mean, there are people out there who are like serial killers and, people with just no conscience and who, who can do things that we just think are absolutely atrocious. Like our sense of morals kind of really, really rebels against the idea of these things, even if we're somebody who doesn't necessarily want to cling to morality in the traditional sense. Some things just are so depraved and so awful, and just seem so lacking in value of humanity and what it is, and what it means, lacking in empathy. Hannah Arendt had once said that conscience is basically it's when conscience arrives, they knock and nobody's home. Like she was talking about this with regard to the Holocaust. It's like there's got to be somebody there who's kind of policing what, not policing so much. I mean, I think that's more Freudian, the way you tend to think of it as a policing. But there's got to be some part of us that kind of says, hey, this is too far. Like, hey, like it gets back to you wouldn't want somebody to do this to you kind of thing. But when you start to take the humanity out of people, then people become just objects. They're just objects either to be manipulated or used, or they become objects that, they're lives that can be just discarded very, very carelessly. Okay? When you don't view something, when you just view a person as an object or a means to an end and not as a person. That's the kind of stuff that also is often in shadow. We're taught, no, that's not the way to behave towards people. But it is part of what we are as humans, that possibility is always there. And that's why shadow work is so potentially dangerous. And that's also why shadow work, oftentimes it's better not to undertake it alone, if you can help it. But it's those parts of us that make us uncomfortable because they are there. That doesn't, again, just because they're there doesn't mean we're going to act on them. This is why I always say that one deals with the shadow creatively. That one works with the shadow through art, recognizes that these things are there. It's safer to work through art than it is to work on things through than to actually carry certain things out in society, right? It's much better to deal with those impulses in that way. But nonetheless, it can still be very, very psychologically difficult. Because it may be because the knowledge of it can be more than we can bear. So shadow work should not be something that's done constantly necessarily either. I think a lot of times throughout life different things come up and we integrate them. Like the people who have been doing Rahani with me, it's like there's stuff that's in shadow. They could be traumas, they could be old angers, they could be all this kind of things in our thing. Can shadow work leak out of us without realizing it? I think most of the time it actually does. But the question is whether or not we are aware of what's going on there, and whether or not whether or not we are mindful enough to be able to integrate that piece. Or rather, are we working with it without the knowledge of I'm doing shadow work? Yes, exactly. No, I understood that. Yes, and that is what I mean. Most of the time, I think when we do it, we don't necessarily know that we're doing it. But the thing we have to be careful of is it's a matter of personal responsibility too. When we have certain thoughts and certain feelings and so forth, a lot of times we want to attribute them to someone else or to some external situation and say, that isn't me. Now, again, and maybe it's not necessarily in your nature. I think it's been said before that probably if you asked most people, would you go out and willfully go out to hurt somebody? Probably the answer would be no. Most of us don't willfully want to go out and hurt people, even if we actually do end up hurting people. But we often, but that's the thing, because we all have a shadow. Okay, so the shadow is not like something you want to get rid of. And in the case of this story, it's like the shadow is actually, the house that he's going into is actually the house. Like, you see this female figure. That's almost like the encounter with the anima. But instead of the man encountering him, it's like he sends the shadow to encounter her. And the shadow has something that's very, it has something, it ends up, having a quality. It kind of ends up learning something. But because it's in shadow, it's figuring out a different way to use it. It's not using it necessarily in the human sense. It's more just kind of like, oh boy, I can act this way, and I can get this from acting this way. It has more of that kind of an energy. And that's like a lot of what we see in society. It's very utilitarian. It's very much about, wow, how can I make money off of this? Oh, how can I get this person to do what I want? If I behave this way or do this or do that. I think so, yeah. Yeah, we're doing shadow work a lot of the times. Completely. Most of us don't sit down to do it. Carl Jung had said that when people came to therapy and they came in to do shadow work, that was usually like the first 9 months. If we don't acknowledge it, it comes out and manifests in other ways. Right. It's very much, yeah, there is and he had said this was the part where people usually gave up, because this is where people had to really confront. This is where you really have to take responsibility for who you are. And that's where a lot of bravery is required, because you have to recognize, first of all, it's not like shadow work is saying you're a terrible person. But we do have a lot of judgments about people and about situations. And we have to recognize that, while we ourselves may not have done what they've done, all of us have the potential to do that. Back pain, anxiety, and stress. Oh, yeah, and often it's what's in shadow. And she was saying shoulder pain. Yeah, it can manifest in the body too. Certainly, our response to things. But what we hold in shadow is often what we don't want to think about, what we repress, what we don't want to confront, places where we're comfortable. The shadow should be something, okay, we've been lately talking about moving into new territory. The shadow should be something that pushes you into new territory, okay? It should be that place where if you are uncomfortable, 9 months is a good number. Well, it's funny, that's the number of months for a birth too, right? But it's like you want to be, shadow work and it can take longer. I mean, really, as many of you are finding as we go through things, as old stuff gets integrated, it's not that like, okay, that's it, I have no more stuff to integrate. Like, your life continues to go on. New stuff happens. New things need to be integrated, But the greater understanding you have of your own shadow, and again, this is not like a self-policing, like I have to be careful of every thought and I have to be ashamed of myself if I think this. No, it's actually just the opposite. You want to give an expression to your shadow. And I mean, ancient rituals used to have a space for the shadow. This is why you had Dionysian rituals, because Dionysian rituals were really about the ways in which we, kind of allow ourselves a space to kind of succumb to that chaos, or allow that to come out in a way that is still, that is maybe not normally socially acceptable, but still reasonably safe for the community. It's not something, or that it manifested itself as how do I want to put it? It would manifest itself as this kind of revelry and partying, and maybe people speaking their minds, and also the drama competitions. That's what I was thinking of. That reason that we have a lot of Greek tragedies and comedies and things, they all come out of these festivals of Dionysus. They're expressions. We talked about catharsis the other day, but even more, but even beyond that, it's just a way in which all parts of us can be expressed in a way that is not going to be a problem socially, right? I mean, we can't. They're picking up my recycling right now. It's the way in which this happens socially, and so we're always negotiating that inner and that outer space. Some of the things that are in shadow are things that we're taught to be ashamed of that we shouldn't be. But other things that are in shadow are just aspects of ourselves that we can't imagine are part of ourselves. But we don't see it. It's not things that, it's not, we don't see it. Like archetypes, you don't see it until something constellates it, until something brings it into the fore. And the more unconscious we are of it, the more that we can potentially, we have the potential to do harm to others and say, well, this is not me, this is them, you know? And also, but it can also be a thing, like in this particular story, the shadow gets recognized, but the guy who wants to talk, he wants to be the intellectual who talks about the true, the good, and the beautiful, nobody cares. The only thing people, well, think about it now. Think about how in this sphere, part of the reason I think the reason that our, you know, that politics, that mass culture and things are the way that they are, is because people don't like things that are boring. I want something that's interesting. I want a drama. You know, I want you to play act. I want you to jump in and to do things in a way that, you know, that is excessive. You know, that there has to be some major thing that happens. Everything has to be like a knockdown, drag out fight. It has to be this, it has to be that. You know, otherwise we're just kind of like, oh, we're not interested in it. It's boring. It's like the shadow has that potential to kind of bring those elements out that we're entertained by. The collective shadow. And so the question is, you know, again, you can acknowledge it. You might even acknowledge your own desire for things, but you know, your own desire to participate in that drama. Because as much as we all say, I don't like drama, we find ourselves getting interested. It's kind of like the car wreck you can't look away from. You find yourself getting interested. We have this draw towards things. So I've always said to people, you don't want to shame yourself out of the actual feelings that you have. That said, those feelings, if they have a safe expression, or that you end up neutralizing it. It's just kind of like, okay, it's there. I know it's there. I understand that it may serve a purpose there, or it may be something that is driving you to think differently about something, or driving you towards a new space when the space you're in is no longer appropriate to you. You can have that kind of relationship with the shadow, and that's probably the most productive relationship, because it allows you to use that energy in a way that that enhances your life, not one that makes you a slave to it. Okay, so I'm going to do our reading, and it's interesting because our first card is transformation. Okay, so this is the death card, right? This is the transformations that we are going through, and weirdly, it is flanked by two aces on both sides. The Ace of Swords and the Ace of Cups. So internally, there's the Ace of Swords. Ace of Swords is that new way of thinking. Unconsciously, the narratives are shifting, okay? That's part of this change. And externally, this has to deal with heart opening. Okay, so we're back to that theme again of heart opening. Our way of thinking shifts, and as soon as our way of thinking is able to shift, because we bring the feminine component into it, our way of thinking shifts. And so now we are moving into a new space, a new emotional space. Now, mind you, also because these are new spaces, we don't always know entirely where we're going or what to do with them. Okay, so this is a case of figuring out, you know, where we're going next. Now, our advice card is intensity. So intensity indicates, again, that there's a lot of energy to want to move ahead. You know, this is fire. This is Page of Wands energy, actually. So there's that enthusiasm. It's that intensity. And so, yeah, we wanna go with that. We don't want to curtail this. Other people may not like our intensity. Other people may not like, you know, or we may have a creative impulse that comes in at a really inconvenient time, but we need to go with it because this is almost like we move in life. We go through periods of time where we feel like we're swimming against the current. This is almost like a burst of fire. This is like something that's going to carry you. Okay, so it'll carry you into the new space. So go where your heart is. Go where your enthusiasm is. Go into where that space is. And ultimately, we have the Eight of Cups, which is the letting go card, okay? And yeah, so when we talk about letting go, this is the space which we're in where we don't keep looking back to the old. We recognize that we're in a new space. It was a conversation I had over the weekend about and I think it kind of ties in with things that I've said recently about going, like when my friend and I went to Sleepy Hollow Cemetery, and it said it feels like nobody's here. People are having experiences almost like, I feel like there's aspects of me that are gone, that have disappeared, that are gone. And it's almost like then we sometimes we start to have a nostalgia for those things that have gone away. But if they've gone away, it's because you don't need them anymore. I think some people, in terms of people I've been working with in healing settings, when they have, we all deal with kind of what they call fragmented souls, where we kind of exist across this continuum, but certain fragments, perhaps from other dimensions, other lifetimes, other existences, somewhere else along that spectrum, they come in and they start interfering with our life. And I feel like a lot of that's emptying out. It's emptying out, and now we're in a new space where we are totally responsible for where we are, and where we have the opportunity to strike it out into new territory. But a lot of times we prefer a world that's been built for us. We don't want to have to build one on our own. And that's where I think we run into the problems. So this is where intensity, you want to go with that, where that wave is carrying you. Wherever it is that you are feeling drawn, wherever you feel like you want to do, that's the space that you want to be in. You want to let the intensity carry you, and then that way you can let go of the other things. When we're in a new space, a lot of times there's an uncomfort or discomfort to it, but it's because we don't want the familiar. It's kind of like that fairy tale where there's the guy, he stays in the house and just sends his shadow out. I had stopped washing dishes because I jumped when you talked about fragmented soul. Whoa, I'm really going through that right now. Yeah. Yes, and that was something, interestingly, the fragmented soul thing, and people who work in shamanism probably deal with this a lot, but that was actually what started me on the road to my connection with Azrael, because that was what I had literally done, is I had done a kind of I don't know, we don't defrag computers anymore, but it's like a defragging of the soul, and trying to kind of bring the pieces together that need to come together, to kind of have everything be recognizing what's relevant here and what's not, and what maybe carried over from other existences or other possible iterations of ourselves that are not in line in some way. And so it's a matter of letting go of what isn't really part of the picture, but we may have a certain attachment to it. And a lot of that, I think, does work through shadow, because it's the way in which the things that are unpleasant, the states in which we are victims, in which we are wounded, where we might want to hang on to that. And again, I think I talked about this a while ago in a live stream where I said, what if we imagined the idea that all of the things about us that are our pain and suffering are things that we actually enjoy, like almost a masochistic kind of thing, like it's something we want to hang on to. But there's a part of us that does. There's a part of us that somehow our wounds are part of our identity too. And it's kind of saying, okay, understand what that was there for, understand how that's changed your life, what direction it's moved you in, and then move on. You don't want to keep coming back to it. Anyway, any more than the person who necessarily has a positive experience, like for example, more like a never again reminder for me. What Suda's saying here. It's kind of like, what was I saying? It was just that there is the person who feels that they're saved religiously, okay? A lot of times all they talk about is the day they're saved. Like there's no moving forward. Whatever experience you're in, whether it's a epiphany and a revelation, or whether or not it's a confronting of your traumatic wounds, it's something that you move through and you keep moving forward. You keep moving through. You keep doing your thing. That's why a lot of times what we tell people is like, okay, when you don't know what to do, we all live our daily lives. We all have stuff that we need to do, right? We just keep doing the thing that we're doing and not try to have an expectation of outcome, not try to have an expectation for the future. And just allow it to be what it's going to be. And eventually, because if you wake up every day with the expectation of something, then you start to distrust yourself. You start to feel like maybe you failed at something. You kind of have to let everything come in. There's been a lot about timing coming up too. Like everything has to come in its proper time. And it's impossible, it would be impossible for me to say, oh, this is going to be the appropriate time. We know that these certain shifts that are going on this month certainly portend that there's going to be changes. And 2025 looks like it's going to be a heck of a year. Not necessarily, none of this has to be in a negative way, but there's going to be a lot of this tumult in kind of the collective that is going to kind of reshuffle things. So we really are in a space where we need to go with the flow, because just simply staying in the same old house, doing it the same old way is not going to be sufficient moving forward. So so dealing with shadow too is just, it's not letting the shadow overtake us. But that means that involves looking at what's there, shining a light on it. The people who are the Hecate worshipers and stuff here, that's really what it's about. It's about shining a light on it, shining a light about what's in the underworld, what's in the darkness there. I feel like the changing of the guard is so delayed this generation. Well, there's been a real reluctance to let go, for sure. And that reluctance is something that, that's part of it. But you can see, because even in all the things that we complain about, think about the person who absolutely hates their job and is just like, oh my God, I've known people like this, I can't wait to get out of this job. And then when it's time to retire, well, I think I'm just going to work one more year. I think I'm going to do Pluto in Capricorn, certainly. Yes, and the fact that this is the end of Pluto in Capricorn, I feel like we've only got a few weeks of that left, not very much time. And so this is really the last gasp of this kind of energy, because when Pluto comes in, Pluto is the shadow. Pluto's the one who comes in and says, okay, let's look deeply here. These are all the things that you think are good about this. Let's look deeply at all the things maybe that are not quite so helpful. So the old guard's not ready to let go, but they will. They will. That I am assured of every day, even when I don't ask. And most of the time I'm not asking. I just get the message. They're like, yeah, trust us, it's ending. It's done. It's over. And in fact, I've even seen several readings lately where they're saying it's over. It's over. It's over. But we have not, it's like we're catching up with it. So at least on because you have to remember the Earth is a very, and exposed. Yes, exactly. And it's the Earth is a very small piece of a much larger universal system. Okay, what we see and what we know, what we think of as our world. And I've heard this. I've encountered this in my own channelings, but other people have as well. The Earth is important. We're here. Okay, but we are only like a little marble in a bigger system of a lot of other marbles, where there's probably lots of other beings that exist. And we, may have in different periods of time come from some of those different places. Earth is just one of them. But it's the only one that we know. But we have to, you kind of have to, it's kind of like when I get the existence card, go out and recognize that there's a bigger picture here. And so we're just kind of a really small little player here. But if there's big change that's going on in the bigger picture, it's going to be change that's going to affect us too. And maybe that's the way to think about it. Because if this change is happening, rippling across the universe or the many universes that exist, then this is just, this is just another blip. You know what I mean? But it feels monumental to us in our day-to-day lives and the things that we're doing. So sometimes it's good to be aware that when we say, well, I'm not seeing the change on an individual level, it's coming. It's coming, but right now it's still something that we are, it's kind of rippling its way to us, as it were. And that means that there's going to be certain of these energies that still need to, there may be still some conflict this month before they finally get put to bed. So anyway, I'm way over time today. So I hope you enjoyed the story that I hope you enjoyed everything today, and then hopefully this was useful, helpful. I'm not, these topics just kind of come up, and I'm not sure how certain things fit in. Oh, you're welcome. Yes, you're welcome. And anyway, I'll stop talking right now. You're welcome. I'm glad you guys are enjoying it. I will be back tomorrow morning. Yes, I will be here tomorrow, and tomorrow's Wednesday, so I'll also be doing Ketonia live stream tomorrow. I put it off till Wednesday. So all of you have a great rest of your day, and I will see you, you're welcome, and I will see you tomorrow morning.